Steve Moran here with Senior Housing Forum, and I'm so excited to talk to Chip Conley. He has written a brand new book. I guess we should maybe do a little bit of history on what else you've done before, but let me start with the book. So he's written a book that's called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And I think that it may be one of the most important books that senior living operators and owners should read and should really help influence how we serve our elders. But why don't you talk a little bit about your background and how you got here?
Sure. So I graduated from college and graduate business school and went to work for a real estate developer. So I have a real estate development background. In my mid-20s, when I was very old and very wise, I decided to start a boutique hotel company with zero hotel experience, but it's a form of real estate. So I became a hotel developer, buying an old motel in the Tenderloin of San Francisco, which is not a very safe neighborhood. And that was 32 years ago. I called the company Joie de Vivre, and over the course of 24 years, created 52 boutique hotels, each with their own name. Almost all of them in California. And then I sold the company in the Great Recession. I just said, listen, I'm ready to move on, do something new. And I was tapped on the shoulder a couple of years later by Brian Chesky, the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb, who asked me if I could come in and help him democratize hospitality and be his in-house mentor and the head of global hospitality and strategy for Airbnb. And to be quite honest, I was 52 years old at that point, and the average age at Airbnb was 26. And I really didn't even understand what home sharing was at that point, 6 years ago. But I took him up on it, and for 4 years was in the trenches helping the founders grow that company. And then for the last 2 years, I have been a strategic advisor to the founders.
And so what came out of that? So I want to actually back up for a second. So out of your hotel experience, you wrote a book called Peak, How Maslow Helps You Get Your Mojo.
How great companies get their mojo from Maslow.
It's close.
A little bit of poetry.
So I love that book. And again, I think it's a great senior living book because most leadership books end up talking about people who work in Silicon Valley who have really high incomes. And it's a book about you and your experiences where you had a lot of these frontline minimum wage, close to minimum wage people, which is very similar to our industry. So I'd also recommend it. It's a little bit older, but I think it's a hugely valuable read.
Still valuable, and actually, there's a revised edition that came out about a year ago, which has a lot of new material in it, and so I think it's still relevant to just about anybody.
Yep. So coming out of your Airbnb, you wrote this great book called Wisdom at Work, and it's about how to be the old guy, the old person in a very young company, right?
Yeah, what was interesting, Steve, was that when Brian asked me to join him, I sort of initially thought, okay, well, they want me for my wisdom and my experience and my historical knowledge of the travel industry. And what I learned very quickly was, oh my gosh, this is a tech company. And I've never worked in a tech company before. And so people were talking a language I really didn't understand, and they were half my age. And quickly I learned that, wow, my role as a modern elder versus the traditional elder is the traditional elder usually had young people sort of sitting at their feet, and the elder was, spouting wisdom, which was based upon historical framework, because frankly, change in the world didn't happen that quickly. So if you're a farmer and your grandpa was teaching you about, the wisdom of the land, that didn't change from generation to generation. Well, when, today that's very different. And this is part of the reason why elders are not, we don't even talk about elders much in modern society. We talk about elderly, but we don't talk about elders. And so what I started to realize is that there was an element of my wisdom that the company needed to tap into, but I needed to be as much of a curious intern as I was a wise mentor. And that's why I ultimately called myself a mentern, mentor and intern together, because half the time I was really in a very beginner's mind way learning a new industry. And the other half of the time I was teaching leadership and strategy and the nuts and bolts of the hospitality industry.
So there's so many places I'd go. I'd love to maybe in a future time explore the whole leadership, interpersonal kind of stuff with you. But what I really want to focus on today is that much of being a modern elder, as I understand it, is about creating that next chapter when people hit an older age. And much of it seems to be sort of purpose, sort of figuring out your purpose for life in that direction. And what I'm particularly interested in sort of chatting with you about today is when you look at senior living communities, so independent living, I know your folks live in a senior living community or assisted living or even a nursing home. How do we take sort of this modern elder principles that you're doing and make it work in that kind of an environment?
Well, let's look at some of the historical framework for the thinking around senior housing. And I'm going to say a few things, and let's start by saying I'm a neophyte. I'm not from the industry, so these are external observations. Think of me as the layperson with these observations. I may be wrong, and if I am, that means that maybe the general public is wrong as well. In some cases, if we look back to the Sun City era, it was almost like, let's surround ourselves with other people our age and have nobody other than the help be a different age. And it's almost like age was no longer an issue because everybody was the same age or roughly. And so there was it was almost like, as Mark Friedman would call it, like age apartheid. It was sort of this separatist world where people would grow old together. It also based upon the premise that people retired at 65 and then sort of generally they went from working to not working almost overnight, and then they were going to do that for maybe 10 or 15 years and then die at age 75 or 80. So there's a bunch of premises here that don't work so well anymore. Number one is the idea that people want to be separated from other ages, and there's more and more evidence and that multi-generational living and working and being with people of different generations is very life-sustaining for all of those generations, especially the older people. Secondly, a lot of people are going to work, and by choice or by necessity, late into life. So the idea that you sort of retire and just play shuffleboard doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And in fact, the idea that people want to be segregated, not just from other ages, but they also want to be sort of in some suburban or ex-urban community way out the hell out there that's not part of the heartbeat of a city doesn't make a lot of sense for a lot of people. The idea, as was true in the hotel industry, this is where I can use my hotel background as a good example here. Generally speaking, when new industries get started, speaking of peak, they focus on the base of the pyramid, the most fundamentals. And so for Marriott and Hilton and Holiday Inn as hotel chains, they were focusing on standards and predictability. But in the 1980s, what the boutique hotel subsegment of the industry proved was, wow, people wanted more than predictability. They wanted an experience. They wanted design. They wanted a place that felt like it was very much the local flavor, especially a food and beverage restaurant or bar within the hotel. Having said all that, what that means is wow, the hotel industry had to start to be less predictable and less cookie cutter. Well, I think the senior housing industry is sort of still stuck in the 1980s, much of it, in terms of there's a boilerplate of what the design is, and they just stamp it out. And whether it's in suburban St. Louis or suburban Florida or suburban some other place, Phoenix, it has that same template. And so I think people are looking for more personalized, more niche-oriented kind of places to live. They want intergenerational experiences. I mean, why couldn't you have a WeWork in a huge facility so that you literally have a incubator for people in their 60s and 70s and 80s to actually go to the office, but the office they're going to is not in some company downtown, but it's actually just across the green there, where there's a bunch of other people their age who all are working part-time as consultants or as coaches and it's nonprofit board members, and that they actually have a place they can go to that feels like it's the office. And so, I think all of that's important. I think wellness is important, and it's way beyond just having a golf course and a swimming pool and a fitness room. It's also giving people the opportunity to try things they've never tried before. A movement studio, learning how to dance, an art studio, learning how to paint, bringing in experts who help people to imagine things that they've always wanted to do, but had never done in their life. So all of those things, I think, are things that senior housing needs to consider.
So you have this thing that you started called the Modern Elder Academy?
Correct, yes.
And right now you have a single location in Mexico.
In Baja California Sur. I live there part of the time, and it's 1 hour north of Cabo San Lucas in the southern part of Baja of Mexico.
And what happens there?
Well, the premise of it was, gosh, if we're going to live a lot longer, let's take a step back for a moment and think about what societies have historically done when people are going through transition. When you're going through puberty, you have a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, a quinceañera to help you sort of make the transition from child to adult. When you move from adolescence to adulthood, you have a commencement ceremony and you graduate from something. You get married, you have a wedding, you have a baby, you have a baby shower. You die, you have a funeral, but between baby shower and funeral, nada, there's nothing. And it's partly because, we added 30 years of life from age 47 at 1907 as the average age in the U.S. in the 20th century. So there's a need for us to take stock of the fact that midlife is full of transitions, and yet we've created nothing that helps people to sort of like tap into the wisdom they've learned and how do they repurpose it out there in the world. And so I decided to create this campus on the beach. It's almost 3 acres on the beach that has usually about 18 people per week in a program. People come on a Sunday and they leave on a Sunday. Average age is 52. So this is not elderly, this is elder. And what do I define as an elder? An elder is a relative term. If you're a 34-year-old surrounded by 20-year-olds, you're an elder. And I think that what I'm trying to help people see is that mutual mentorship is the future. It's not about, all of the power being held by the older people and then the physics of wisdom going from old to young. It goes in both directions. And so it's a great place for people to get curious in midlife about how to navigate their midlife transitions. And let's acknowledge we have a lot of transitions in midlife. We may lose a parent. We will lose a parent, or two, or both. We might get divorced. We may change our career or our job. We may have menopause if we're a woman, or andropause if we're a man. We may have diagnosis, health diagnosis we weren't expecting. We'll have empty nest syndrome if we have kids. All of these things happen in midlife, and we have zero in the way of rituals or rites of passage, other than maybe some retirement party, that is usually not particularly exciting. And so I think that the idea of creating a rite of passage, a ritual, a celebration for people in midlife is a long time coming. And the experience so far of the 225 people who've gone through the program has been over the top positive.
So how do we take the Modern Elder Academy and transplant or create a version of it for senior living? And of course, we're talking about a much older age cohort. Right. From a principal standpoint, it seems like it could be the same thing.
It could. We've had people in their late 70s in our program. And so I think what's clear is this, if there's something that's, I think, quite baked into what the Academy is about, is being a lifelong learner and creating the space for people to get liminal. Now, liminal is a word that a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know it 3 or 4 years ago when I started writing the book. Liminal basically means you are in transition. And so the ultimate liminality is caterpillar to butterfly, which is like, wow, it's like one thing and then it becomes another. And there's in between, it's in the goo of a chrysalis or a cocoon. Well, it's almost like as you get older, you feel like you're not supposed to be liminal anymore. You're not supposed to be sort of awkward. It's like all that awkwardness was something you did younger in life. You're supposed to have it all together. Well, I was very awkward at Airbnb my first year learning the tech industry. And I'm very awkward today at age 58 learning to surf and learning Spanish. But when I got comfortable with the idea of being liminal or awkward, and the only way I was going to get better at that was to actually throw myself into it, that's part of what we teach at the academy. And I think that would be beautiful if there was something like an academy in senior housing where people could feel like, well, I'm going to go do that 3-day program where for the person who's always imagined painting, but the last time they did it was finger painting in kindergarten. And so, that kind of, curiosity is the elixir of life. And so I think if senior living could actually rethink of itself as a lifelong living place where people live longer in a more vibrant way, partly because they're constantly learning, I think that's a new way to think of senior housing.
Yeah, I love that, because right now we are still mostly a cruise ship or luxury hotel model, where we say, come move in and we'll do everything for you. And while going on a cruise ship for a week or two can be pretty cool, most of us wouldn't want to be incarcerated on one for the rest of our lives, because it would create brain atrophy and physical atrophy. Although I was on a cruise over Thanksgiving week, and I met a woman who lives on cruise ships. I was really very, and I didn't like her very much, honestly.
Well, maybe there's a reason she lives on cruise ships, because nobody else wants to live with her. I don't know. I mean, I think the key here is, atrophy is a really critical word you just used. Atrophy is something that happens as we get older. And the only way we work against atrophy is to actually continue to use those muscles. And whether that's the brain muscles, the heart muscles, the physical muscles of our bodies, these are the things that help us stay vibrant longer. But the thing that a lot of people don't really look at, and I think this is another piece that senior housing could focus on, is there's a heart and soul muscle that gets better with age. One of the things, our IQ doesn't grow with time, but our EQ does. And we know, based upon a lot of studies, that there's a U curve of happiness, and people get happier as they age, interestingly, which is not what the societal narrative is. Plus, they get smarter about their own humanity and emotions, as well as others. So I actually think there's an element of figuring out how to harness all of that beautiful, emotional, and to some degree soulful and spiritual wisdom that's gained as we get older, and look at how is it used in the world. Is it used by working with teenagers? And there's a beautiful program in Chicago where a retirement home actually is connected with a Brazil high school. The Brazil students want to learn English, and the retirement folks in Chicago just want to actually feel relevant still. And how do we create that kind of connection? How do we create mentorship opportunities? Wouldn't it be interesting if a bunch of men and women who have some business and entrepreneurship background in a retirement home would actually open themselves up to whether it's junior achievement people in high school, or literally people who are young entrepreneurs in their 20s and 30s to be mentors. And so I think there's lots of opportunities here.
Yeah, I like this mentorship so much. There's a guy by the name of Jack Cummings who is in his 80s. He lives in a retirement community in Southern California, and he has become a part of my team. And he won't even let me help him pay expenses when he comes to visit or goes and does things. He writes for me. And when I need, when I'm stuck on something, he's the guy I pick up and call because he's got so much knowledge, and I think it's such a missed opportunity. Well, the thing I'm wondering, so let's try this. I don't know what you would think about this. So let's assume that we go back to your hotel days, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to create this modern elder version of your hotel. And the way you're going to do it is you're going to somehow try to connect your frontline, your housekeepers, and your laundry people and your food service workers with your resident, with your guests. How would you make that? How would you make that so that they could interact and they could serve each other well? And I know that I'm just throwing this out of the blue.
Yeah, out of the blue, that's fine. I mean, I think, you know what, having been at my parents' place, which is called the Forum down in Cupertino Hills area, you know, the staff is beloved by the residents, and yet you don't really get to know the staff and their families. So wouldn't it be interesting? And 80% of the staff is immigrant, and wouldn't it be interesting if the immigrant staff or just any of the staff, you know, a few times a year there was an event. There could be an Easter egg hunt. Wouldn't it be interesting if there's an Easter egg hunt at the senior living facility, at the community, where the seniors are enjoying with the kids of the workers out there doing an Easter egg hunt? I mean, that's a great example. Another example could just be, you know, a swimming day. You know, a day where you just, you know, if there's just a large enough space in the swimming pool where it's and maybe it's more than once, like once a month. It's where people, you know, the staff brings their families to come swim there, and the residents get to know the staff families. So I just think that there's you know, there's always risks in these things. You know, let me just start by saying innovation doesn't happen by not taking a risk. So there's a risk here. There's a risk that the staff feels a little too familiar, and they start feeling entitled. But I actually think the upside is not only does the staff feel more committed and loyal to working there and less focused on how much money are you paying me, which is a very important thing for the staff for sure. But if that's the only reason they're there, then this is just a job. This is not a career or a calling for them.
Yeah.
Similarly, for the seniors, the residents, it gives them a way to actually feel even more connected with the staff, and especially their younger family. And so, you know, I just think it's a great opportunity. That's a simple thing to do. It would cost very little money to do that.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying that, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be cool? And yeah, I know there are all sorts of food safety issues, right? But wouldn't it be interesting if you did a potluck where you had again, because you've got most of these immigrant families, brought in their best dishes.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
That would be it would be a killer. And I think you could figure out the food service safety stuff somehow.
We'd have a lot of lumpia. We have a lot of, because there's a lot of Filipino and Filipina folks. But yes, it's depending upon what region you're in, at least here in the San Francisco Bay Area, that just the Filipino and Filipina staff just is drawn to hospitality. So, but yes, there's lots of opportunities. And I actually think if the senior housing industry doesn't make changes like that, it will be disrupted. And that's a word that is used more and more. And having been at Airbnb for 6 years, of course, I'm very familiar with the word. But I think it's an industry that actually is ripe for disruption.
Well, you probably don't remember, but when you spoke at the Senior Living Innovation Forum and you opened up for question, I was the first guy with my hand up, and you talked about your parents living in a senior living community. So I asked you if you would be willing to move into your parents' community. And I remember it so clearly because there was this long pause, because it was almost unfair because it was sort of a setup in front of all these senior living executives. And finally you said something along the lines of no.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would still say no.
Yeah.
I would still say no, but I think, I don't know. I think it's a real interesting opportunity for innovators. One of the challenges with any industry that is very capital intensive and real estate intensive, as is this industry, is it takes longer to change because, you know, the physical facilities are already sort of set. And so I think that's one of the challenges with the industry. but that's one of the opportunities as well, is to sort of say, okay, someone can come along with a new idea and then start just stamping them out. I mean, Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville is getting a ton of attention
Yep.
because it's doing something different. And really at the heart of what Buffett is doing, or what the Margaritaville is doing, is it's saying, nostalgia is fun. Let's have a good time, and let's create community. And let's create community not in the way of just sort of like, the sort of starch kind of way that community is created in many senior living communities, not all, but more in like, hey, these are the kind of people I used to go to concerts with. These are the kinds of people I used to go to college with. This is like the kind of people I would go to a college or high school reunion with, which is very different than, a lot of the kind of special events or, I don't know, the fun events that are created at most senior living facilities.
So I'm reading a book. I'm just about done with it. Called, actually, I can't want to get the title right because it's got me. It's called Joyful by a woman by the name of Ingrid Fettel-Lee. She is or was with IDEO. And I listened to a chat and this book club thing that Adam Grant and Malcolm Gladwell are doing. But as I've been reading this book, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of joy. And I think senior living provides a lot of comfort, but I'm not sure it really provides much joy. And I think that's sort of what we've been talking about.
Wouldn't it be interesting if there was a joy class? Literally,
yeah.
Like it was once a week, there was a joy class, and someone came in and just spent 2 hours, and some of it was out in the field. It was like taking your iPhone, learning how to use it in new ways, and then going out and snapping photos on your iPhone of things that bring you joy, and then coming back and sharing them with other people in the room. I mean, like, that's pretty simple. You learn more about your iPhone while at the same time, having a beautiful in the moment experience of your facility. And maybe it's just a butterfly, and maybe it's some piece of architecture that you just sort of looked at it a little differently. And I don't know. I don't know. Having started a company called Joie de Vivre, which means joy of life, you're talking to the right guy on this one.
Yeah, no, I think that such things. Well, it sounds like after you've sort of gotten your Elder Academy going, maybe you need to go into the senior living business. So
I have been asked a few times about that. Well, we'll see.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
Well, Chip, thank you so much for this time. This has been so cool. I know we haven't come up with any answers, and I didn't expect that to happen, but what I did expect, and I think we've done a great job of, is just to help people think about how, in my industry, how to think about what they're doing and how to make it better, and ultimately, I guess, to have more fun.
Yep.
Because it seems like you have a lot of fun at the things you're doing. So
I do. Do I have bad days? Of course I do. But there's a reason I started my company, and I called it Joie de Vivre, which is not a practical name in the United States. No. But yes. Well, thank you. It's been a joy to actually be with you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks a lot, Chip. I really appreciate it.
All right.